I was sitting at my own dinner table when my son-in-law slammed his fist down and shouted, "You're too old to manage this farm. Hand it over." The sting cut deep, but I didn't raise my voice. I remembered every nail I hammered, every dollar I saved to rebuild this land after my wife passed. They thought I was weak, but I had been keeping one truth locked away. While they waved fake papers, I pulled out the original deed signed, sealed, and mine. The room went silent. That was only the beginning. If they thought they could write me out of my own legacy, they were about to learn what a lifetime of sacrifice really meant. Follow my story until the end. Subscribe to the channel, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has reached. The morning air in Asheville carried a softness only spring could bring. The fields stretched out like a painting, the grass still damp with dew, the mountains guarding the horizon in their usual, unshakable silence. From the porch, the rocking chair creaked gently beneath me as I sipped black coffee. Birds darted from tree to tree, and for a brief moment, I convinced myself this was exactly the life I had earned. After decades of hard work, this farm was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world couldn't find me. Peace had a weight to it, one that settled across my shoulders like an old quilt. Every corner of the property spoke of long hours of sweat and the quiet pride of having something that was finally, fully mine. I thought I'd spend the rest of my days in this rhythm, slow and undisturbed, a man given back the time he'd always traded away for others. Retirement wasn't just an ending for me. It was a promise of rest I believed I had kept faithfully for everyone else before myself. On the porch railing sat a framed photograph of Eleanor, my wife. The glass had smudges from where my fingers often lingered. She was smiling in that photo, the kind of smile that lit up the entire kitchen back then. Years had passed since she left, but the emptiness never truly softened. Most days, her absence felt like an extra chair at the table that nobody dared move. Raising Marla after Eleanor's passing had taken everything out of me. I played both father and mother, working longer hours than my body allowed and pretending not to notice how lonely the house grew at night. There had been missed birthdays, forgotten school plays, and meals eaten cold because I was too tired to cook. Still, I told myself it was worth it if she grew up strong, if she understood what I had sacrificed. Marla arrived that afternoon, her car crunching up the gravel drive like an intruder in a place that didn't often welcome strangers. I stood to greet her, my chest tightening with a blend of warmth and distance. Hugs had become stiff over the years, though her perfume still reminded me of the little girl who once climbed onto my shoulders and begged for rides around the yard. We sat at the kitchen table, where the wood had worn thin from decades of elbows resting during long conversations. Marla looked around, her eyes wandering over the silence that hung between us. "It's too quiet here, Dad," she said with a faint smile, though there was something else underneath, something that didn't sound like concern for me. Her words lodged themselves deeper than I wanted to admit. Too quiet. That was the point. This farm wasn't built for noise. It was built for peace. But before I could respond, she leaned forward, voice carrying a brightness that felt rehearsed. "What if we opened the place up a little, invited some friends, maybe colleagues? We could have gatherings here. People would love it. It could be lively." The suggestion unsettled me. My eyes drifted to the window, the view of the pasture wide and unbroken, a canvas I had painted my retirement on. The thought of strangers filling that space tightened my chest. I smiled politely, nodding, but suspicion pricked at me. Was this really about me, or about her later, alone again on the porch? I turned her words over like a stone in my hand. Doubt crept in where peace once lived. Had I misjudged what this farm was supposed to be? Was my retirement meant to serve me or become something else entirely? The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the fields. As the wind rustled the leaves, my mind played a cruel trick. I pictured the land crowded with unfamiliar faces, laughter and footsteps echoing where quiet once ruled. The porch no longer felt like my refuge. Maybe my retirement wouldn't be as quiet as I had hoped. The first weekend after Marla's suggestion, the stillness of my farm broke in a way I hadn't expected. Saturday morning light had just crept over the ridge when the sound of tires crunching gravel carried across the yard. A chorus of unfamiliar voices drifted through the open window, their laughter and chatter foreign against the quiet I had come to cherish. From the porch, I saw cars lined up along the dirt path, their polished surfaces glinting in the sun like a caravan invading a sanctuary. Strangers emerged, Marla's colleagues. I later learned carrying tote bags, cases of drinks, even folding chairs. They waved at me with casual cheer, as though they belonged here. My stomach tightened. This was not the peace I had envisioned for my retirement. This was intrusion wearing the mask of hospitality. Inside the barn, Marla had arranged a casual meeting. The doors were thrown open, music spilled out, and voices echoed in every corner. I hadn't been asked, hadn't even been told. My barn, once the place I stored tools and memories, now housed animated conversations and clinking glasses. Neighbors passing by slowed their trucks, craning their necks at the commotion. A couple offered a polite nod, though the disapproval lingered in their eyes. I stood at the edge, not as host, but as an outsider in my own space. Marla's friends moved easily between one another, treating the farm like an open venue. No one asked me to sit. No one acknowledged that I was the reason they had this place to gather. It was as though I'd faded into the background, invisible among the very walls I had raised. One man, leaning against the fence, looked me up and down. Farmhands still around. "Huh," he said with a smirk, nudging his companion. My jaw tightened. Before I could correct him, another voice piped in. "Noise is good for old folks, keeps them from falling asleep too soon." Laughter followed, sharp as barbed wire. It wasn't the insult itself that cut deepest. It was the realization that I was being written out of the story of my own land. To them, I wasn't the owner, the father, the man who had built this place brick by brick. I was a prop, a background figure. My silence held, but inside, anger began to smolder beneath the weight of restraint. When the gathering finally thinned, I found Marla in the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from laughter and wine. I tried to speak gently, choosing my words carefully. "You should have told me, Marla. This is my home. I deserve to know who's here." She brushed me off with a breezy tone that stung more than the words themselves. "It's good for the place. Dad, don't be selfish. The farm can be more than just quiet." Her dismissal landed heavy. A dismissal not just of my concern, but of me. In her eyes, this was not my retreat. It was her project, her playground, her stage. She believed she was helping, framing her intrusion as improvement. I nodded, keeping my voice steady, but a hard knot of resentment settled deep. That night, long after the last car had left, the barn lights still glowed. Echoes of laughter lingered like ghosts in the rafters. Standing at the window, I whispered into the dark, "They think I won't fight back." And in that moment, I knew they were wrong. Morning light filtered through the curtains, softer than usual, almost apologetic after the chaos of the night before. The silence felt heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Walking out onto the porch, the boards creaked under tired feet. The farm should have smelled of dew and spring blossoms, but instead faint smoke from cigarette butts lingered near the path. Paper cups and bottles lay scattered where strangers had laughed and carried on as if this place were theirs. Each step across the yard brought a dull ache, not just in old bones, but deeper in pride, in memory. The barn that once stood like a symbol of peace now bore signs of intrusion. A stain near the door, smudges on the walls, chairs dragged without care. The violation was quiet but sharp. What had been built with sacrifice and hope no longer felt untouched. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen was still. Marla had left a stack of dishes for later, evidence of the gathering she called casual. There was nothing casual in how it gnawed at the soul. Moving down the hall, a light from her temporary office caught the eye. She must have left it on by mistake, stepping closer. The sight of an open ledger on the desk stopped everything cold. The pages told a story he hadn't been invited to. Columns of expenses, lists of contributions, notes about future events, all written as though the farm had shifted ownership in silence. Names of colleagues, totals beside them, vague lines about venue maintenance. His own name was nowhere. It was as though he had been erased, as if the land, the house, the very boards under his feet belonged to someone else. Breath caught in the throat. Betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet. Sitting in neat rows of ink that ignored a lifetime. That ledger turned every hour of labor, every dollar saved, every moment of dreaming with a late wife into nothing but background for someone else's ambition. Sitting in the chair, the mind wandered back to nights spent alone after she passed, counting bills, clipping coupons, saving enough to buy this place. Back then, the dream was simple, a quiet retreat, a patch of earth to call his own. Never once did the thought cross that the farm would become someone else's platform, a stage to build reputation and clout. Marla's handwriting in the margins looked foreign, sharp, deliberate. It wasn't the hand of a daughter preserving family, it was the script of someone crafting a new empire. Later that afternoon, when Marla breezed into the room, he asked carefully, "I saw the ledger. Marla, what exactly are you doing with it?" She gave a quick laugh, brushing back her hair as if swatting away an insect. "Oh, Dad, paperwork's boring, you wouldn't understand. I'm just making things more organized. You don't need to worry yourself." The words sank like stones. You wouldn't understand. Dismissal wrapped in a smile, erasing him with a casual phrase. The sting was sharper than any insult. Outdated. Irrelevant. That was what she saw when she looked at him now. Not the man who had raised her. Not the man who had kept this family together when grief threatened to tear it apart, just someone to be set aside. Heat rose to the face, hands trembling though they stayed hidden behind his back. No scene was made. No argument forced. Only silence, chosen carefully, leaving the room. The house felt foreign. His own footsteps sounded like those of a stranger in a borrowed home. Out on the porch, the fields stretched wide, still carrying the same spring green. Yet even they felt stolen. A whisper escaped, too soft for anyone but the wind to hear. "If they want to write me out of the story, they'll regret it. The night ahead would be long." Words like outdated and irrelevant echoed louder than any laughter from the barn. They would echo until dawn, when silence could no longer hold them. The table felt heavier than ever that Sunday evening. The house was quiet, the fields outside settling into dusk, but the silence between us was sharper than any sound. I looked across at Marla, her fork clinking gently against her plate, and let the words roll out steady and deliberate. "This farm is mine. Don't forget it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Years of weathering storms, losing a wife. Raising her alone, my tone carried weight she couldn't miss. The air between us stiffened, but Marla didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, the corner of her mouth tightening into something between pity and defiance. "Dad," she said lightly, as though scolding a child. "You're being dramatic. This isn't just about you. I'm building a future here for all of us." Her words scraped against me, sharp as nails against wood. A future for us. Funny how us suddenly meant her friends, her colleagues, her reputation while I sat invisible at the head of my own table. And then came the blow I hadn't expected. She admitted she'd already started advertising events, spreading word in town, laying claim to this place as if the ink had dried on some transfer of ownership I'd never signed. The food on my plate turned to ash in my mouth. I thought of the late nights spent hammering these walls back into shape after her mother died, of the aching hands and the sacrifice that built this sanctuary. She wanted to turn it into a backdrop. Monday morning brought no relief. A knock at the door revealed a neighbor, cheerful, congratulating Marla on her wonderful farm events. He barely glanced my way, as if I were hired help. The insult stung worse than any slap. Ownership, identity, pride all slipping, piece by piece, into her hands. I bit back the anger. Shouting would only feed her story that I was outdated, stubborn, irrelevant. Instead, I studied her face that night, the confidence, the smug certainty, and I knew what had to be done. Storms don't always roar. Sometimes they gather in silence, steady and patient, until the right moment to break. I walked the farm alone, darkness wrapping around me like an old coat. My fingers brushed the beams I'd restored with my own hands. The fences that held back more than just cattle, they held back the memory of every sacrifice I'd made. They're writing me out, I whispered into the night. But I'll write the ending myself. The silence after dinner was heavier than the old beams in my farmhouse. Plates sat cold on the table, untouched for the last hour. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wood grain, trying to make sense of how quickly my own home had started to feel like foreign ground. The quiet didn't last. Craig slammed his fist on the table so hard that the silverware rattled. His voice tore through the room like a thunderclap. You're too old to manage anything. Luther, hand the farm over. It's time you stopped clinging to something you can't handle. Shock burned hotter than the coffee still sitting in my mug. This was no slip of the tongue, no heated remark. It was a declaration. He had said out loud what Marla had only danced around. They wanted the farm. The words pressed against my chest like a weight. My hands curled under the table, nails digging into my palms to keep me steady. It wasn't just the insult of being called old. It was the theft hidden inside the accusation that everything I'd worked for had somehow become theirs to claim. Craig's face was flushed, his voice louder than the ticking clock on the wall. This farm belongs to the future, not to some old man who can't keep up. Marla has the vision. She can turn this place into something. You're stuck in yesterday, the knife cut deep, not just through pride, but through memory. My wife's face surfaced in my mind, her smile in the spring light the day we first looked at this property together. We'd dreamed of quiet mornings, peace after years of grinding work. That dream hadn't been for Craig's future. It had been for us. For me. A lump tightened in my throat, but grief sharpened itself into anger. Craig mistook my silence for surrender. That was his mistake. I stood, slowly, but with the steadiness of a man who had carried more weight than Craig could imagine. My voice carried through the room, calm but edged like a blade. This farm is my blood and bone. Every beam, every fence post, every acre has my sweat in it. No one takes it while I'm breathing. The air froze. Craig's lips tightened. But before he could speak, I pushed further. And before you waste any more breath trying to bully me, let me make this clear. The deed, I tapped the table with my finger, slow and deliberate, still has my name on it. The original deed. And I won't be signing anything you or Marla wave under my nose. The room went silent except for the creak of the old farmhouse walls. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Craig leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, his eyes narrowed with a kind of hatred I hadn't seen before. Marla's voice broke the quiet. See, Dad, this is why people think you're selfish. You'd rather hoard this place until you drop dead than think about anyone else. The words landed like a hammer. Not just greed now, betrayal. My own daughter choosing her husband's side against me. She didn't see sacrifice or memory. or the years I'd bent my back to give her opportunities. She saw only property, only something to claim. The wound cut deeper than Craig's shouting. It wasn't just the farm they wanted, it was me erased from my own story. Craig shoved his chair back, the legs scraping hard against the floor. Fine, you want to play stubborn, I'll make this official. With or without you. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The sound echoed in my chest long after he was gone, alone now. I leaned forward, my hand brushing the old table that had seen decades of meals, arguments, and prayers. My voice was low but steady, over my dead body. The words weren't an outburst. They were a vow. Morning light crept across the wooden floorboards of the farmhouse when I noticed something out of place. A thin stack of papers had been slid under my door, their edges bent from being shoved hastily. For a moment, I thought it might have been an accident junk mail from town that Marla forgot to hand me. But when I picked them up, my chest tightened. These weren't advertisements or letters. They were legal documents. Craig's name sat neatly typed across the top alongside Marla's, listed under a bold heading, Joint Ownership Proposal. My name was nowhere to be found. I read each line carefully, my eyes stinging at the words. The language was cold, transactional, as if I were already dead and the farm had slipped into their hands. Craig hadn't wasted a day since his outburst. While I was still sitting at my own kitchen table trying to find the right words, he'd already gone to a lawyer. The silence of the house made the paper feel louder than any shouting match we'd had the night before. My stomach churned with dread, but beneath it, anger began to form like a stone in my chest. They thought they could outpace me. I went to the safe tucked into the closet of my bedroom. It had been years since I opened it. The lock was stiff, the metal cold. Inside sat a few things I had guarded for decades: my wife's wedding ring, the photographs of Marla as a child, and most importantly, the deed, the original deed to this farm, bearing my signature in thick black ink, dated long before Craig ever entered this family. I pulled out a folder of old receipts. 2. Lumber, nails, roofing. Even the loan I had taken when my back wasn't strong enough to do it alone. My hands lingered on each slip of paper. The ink faded, but the memory sharp. Every nail hammered into this place had been done with my hands or paid for with my sweat. I sat there for a long time. Papers spread across the table, until the morning sun reached the glass frame of my wife's photo. Her smile was soft, steady. She had dreamed of peace here. Not this chaos, I whispered to her memory. I won't let them erase us. By lunchtime, I drove into town, hoping a cup of coffee at the diner would clear my mind. Instead, I walked into another cut, sharper than the first. Marla was there, her voice carrying across the small room. She was surrounded by neighbors, her hands waving in the air as if she owned the place. It won't be long, she said with a bright smile. The farm will be under my name. We'll have more events, more gatherings, something this community can actually enjoy. Laughter followed, easy and familiar, like they'd already accepted it as fact. My boots felt heavy as I froze by the door. A neighbor patted Marla's shoulder. Congratulations. Marla. About time the farm had new energy. His eyes didn't even flicker toward me. I was standing right there, and yet I was invisible. Heat rushed to my face. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was humiliation. Public erasure. The very people who once shook my hand for bringing life back to this land now looked through me like I was a ghost. I waited until she walked outside. The spring air was sharp, the gravel crunching under our shoes in the diner parking lot. Marla, I said, low but steady. She turned, surprised at first, then annoyed. Dad, what are you doing here? I heard what you said. My voice was calmer than I felt. This land is mine. If you or Craig try to alter that, if you forge or twist the ownership, you'll find yourself facing the law. Not just me. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into something between a smirk and dismissal. You don't understand, Dad. Times are changing. You can't hold on to everything forever. We're doing what's best. Best for who I shot back. Because it sure as hell isn't for me. Her eyes went cold. You wouldn't understand. You're clinging to something that's already slipping away. Her words cut deeper than Craig's fist on the table ever could. I stood there, fighting the urge to shout, but I didn't. I turned away, fists tight, and walked back to my truck. That night, I sat at the old oak desk in my study, the deed laid out in front of me. The lamplight glowed over its edges as I wrote in my journal, "They think I'm cornered. They've forgotten I built this corner with my own 2 hands." I closed the book with a heavy thud and picked up the phone. My fingers hesitated only a second before dialing. "Hello," a familiar voice answered. "It's Luther," I said. "I need your help, and I think you're the only one I can trust." The call was short, but it lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. The knock came just after sunrise. A county officer, uniform pressed and face unreadable, stood at my gate holding a sealed envelope. His presence felt like an ambush, though his words were formal, distant. The paper he delivered carried a petition Craig and Marla had filed a claim questioning my sole ownership of the farm. They argued I was unfit due to my age, 74, and alleged declining health. It wasn't just words on a page. It was an assault on my dignity. To be told, on paper no less, that I was incapable of managing the very land I had rebuilt with my own hands, it cut deep. My jaw clenched as the officer left, dust trailing behind his car, leaving me staring at that envelope as if it were a death notice. By mid-morning, the whispers had started. In town, at the feed store, I caught sight of familiar faces leaning in close, voices lowered, their eyes darted toward me, then away. It didn't take long to realize Craig's poison had already spread. A man I'd known 20 years muttered about old Luther forgetting his taxes. Another said I'd let repairs go for too long. Lies, each one of them, but repeated often enough to stick. Craig was clever. He hadn't just come after the farm. He was erasing my reputation, planting doubts in the soil of my community. That was a different kind of theft, one that didn't just steal land, but stole the respect I'd earned. Walking back through town, the air felt heavier than usual. I passed neighbors who once greeted me with warmth. This time they offered thin smiles or none at all. Loneliness pressed down on me harder than the weight of the petition in my pocket. Every step home echoed with humiliation, anger simmering beneath the surface. But anger, if left to rot, only poisons the one who carries it. That afternoon I met with an old friend, Thomas, an attorney I trusted with more than just legal battles. We sat in the back room of his office, blinds drawn, voices low. He spread out the petition on the table, studying it with the focus of a man who'd seen fights like this before. "They're building a case on sand," he said, his finger tapping the page. "We'll gather every deed, every receipt, every witness to your health and work. This isn't the end, it's the start." His words steadied me. For the first time since the officer arrived, I felt a spark of resistance flicker inside. They wanted to paint me as weak, outdated, but the truth was in my calloused hands. In the beams of that barn I restored nail by nail. In the soil I tilled through grief and storms. When night fell, I opened the mailbox at the end of the lane. Dozens of anonymous flyers spilled out, smearing my name in bold lies: neglectful, unfit, too old. My fists tightened. I carried them back to the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the flames swallow the words. As the paper curled and blackened, I whispered into the crackling fire. They want war, they'll get it. The lies turned to ash, but the fight was just beginning. The farmhouse felt smaller than usual that Thursday evening. Every chair in the living room was filled, and more people leaned against the walls, arms crossed, eyes darting. Marla had called it a family meeting, but the weight in the air told me it was something else. My land, my home, had turned into a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. She stood at the front, crisp papers in her hand, her husband looming nearby. Her voice carried the kind of authority I had never given her. Dad and I already agreed this farm will transition under my name. Tonight. We just want to make things clear to everyone. Gasps rippled. Murmurs followed. I sat still, staring at the fire in the hearth, letting their words echo before I spoke. Then Craig added his poison. He forgets things. He's too old to handle the responsibility. We're just doing what's best. Humiliation tightened in my chest. For decades I had carried this place through storms, debt, grief, and now, my own flesh and blood was erasing me in front of neighbors who once nodded to me with respect. I rose slowly, pulling a weathered folder from my side. The room hushed. "This," I said, holding up the original deed, "has my name on it, bought with my sweat, my money, my years. Don't let her fool you into thinking otherwise." The murmurs quieted. Some eyes widened. Truth cuts cleaner than lies, and I let the silence speak for me. Then a voice broke through a neighbor who had kept to himself until now. "I heard Craig bragging," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "He said he'd take this farm the moment Luther was out of the way." Gasps again, sharper this time. Marla's face stiffened, the mask slipping. Arguments burst from every corner, some siding with me, others shouting for Marla. The noise swelled, loud enough to shake the windows. Through it all, I stood still, letting their anger crash like waves around me. When the noise reached its peak, I said, steady and low, "If you want a war for this land, you just declared it." The voices blurred into chaos, but one sentence cut through. "We'll take this to court." By morning, the whole town seemed to know. News travels fast in a place like Asheville, especially when it involves family feuds and property lines. The local paper carried a small piece in the community section, just a few sentences tucked between church announcements and high school sports scores. But there it was. Clear as day, local farm faces legal dispute between father and daughter. My name wasn't printed, but anyone who lived here longer than a month knew who it was about. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me as I stepped into the diner for coffee. Folks I'd known for decades glanced up, some with sympathy, others with judgment. A woman I'd once helped fix a broken fence smiled too politely, like pity had turned her lips stiff. A man from church nodded without a word, but I caught the whisper he passed to the waitress. Such a shame. At his age, every look, every whisper, made me feel smaller, like the farm I'd worked my bones into was shrinking under gossip. Humiliation clung to me like dust. Pride wounded deeper than I wanted to admit. My life's work wasn't just under attack at home, it was now public spectacle. Relatives weren't any better. By afternoon, the phone calls started. My sister-in-law spoke carefully, like she was walking on glass. "Luther. Maybe Marla just wants what's best for everyone." A cousin outright accused me of being too stubborn, too controlling. "You're stuck in the past," he said. "Maybe it's time to let the younger ones handle things." But not everyone sided with her. A few voices, softer, reached out to remind me they knew what I'd sacrificed. A nephew confessed he was ashamed of how quickly people turned. A neighbor slipped a note under my porch door. "I believe you. The family tree I once thought unbreakable was splitting into pieces. Every branch seemed to bend toward either her or me." I remembered holidays where laughter filled every room. Marla sitting at the piano while cousins sang. Those memories now felt poisoned. The warmth was gone, replaced by cold division. Sorrow weighed heavy. A man doesn't reach my age without learning that time changes everything, but I never expected my own blood to be the storm tearing down what I built. And yet, the tide shifted in small, unexpected ways. Late in the day, I received a quiet visit from a local official I'd known since his daddy ran the county office. He had reviewed the papers. My deed, the one I had pulled from my safe, was clean, solid, indisputable. Your name is the only one that counts. Luther, he told me firmly. Then he showed me the so-called transition papers Craig and Marla had waved around. They were incomplete, missing signatures, with phrases so vague they wouldn't last 2 minutes in a courtroom. Suspicious at best, useless at worst. That news trickled through town faster than the lies ever did. By evening, a couple of neighbors who had turned cold stopped by, offering awkward apologies. One even said, "Didn't mean to doubt you. Luther, folks talk too fast sometimes." Their voices softened the ache just a little. Relief crept in, fragile but real. Hope, a small spark, began to glow again. But when night fell, the relief gave way to reflection. Trust isn't something you repair with a single apology. Betrayal leaves scars that stay even when the bleeding stops. I thought about Marla as a little girl, chasing fireflies behind the barn. I thought about the years I spent saving every dime after her mama died, just to make sure she'd have a home that stood solid. And now, she was tearing it apart, not just the land, but the foundation of trust between us. Could forgiveness ever be possible? Maybe. But even if it came, it wouldn't erase what she'd done. Some wounds stay beneath the skin, no matter how many years pass. Bitterness pressed against wisdom. I wasn't blind with rage anymore. I was heavy with the knowledge that my own blood had chosen greed over loyalty. The phone rang late that night. I let it ring twice before answering, knowing who it would be. Craig's voice cut sharp through the line, calm, cold, certain. "We filed the papers. This is going to court." Luther. The silence on my end must have unnerved him, because he added, "You can't stop this. It's already moving forward." I tightened my grip on the receiver, but my voice stayed steady, even quiet. "Then I'll see you in front of the judge." I hung up and sat in the dark, staring out the window at the land I'd built with my own 2 hands. The fields glowed pale under the moonlight, and I swore silently I wouldn't let them take it from me, not in gossip, not in paperwork, and not in court. The battle wasn't just about land anymore. It was about my dignity. The courthouse in Asheville carried the kind of silence that pressed down on a man's shoulders. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed. Every cough from the gallery felt like a judgment, walking in that morning. My hands tightened around the leather folder I carried. Inside it, the deed and receipts I had guarded for decades. My legs were steady, but my chest bore the weight of knowing my own daughter and her husband were waiting on the other side, ready to paint me as less than what I was. The benches were packed. Neighbors sat stiffly, some leaning forward with curiosity, others keeping their eyes down, not wanting to choose a side. Relatives whispered in small clusters, already split into factions like a church divided after a bad sermon. My head stayed high. No matter what came out of their mouths, this was still my farm, my fight. When the judge entered, the shuffle of bodies stilled into silence. And soon enough, Craig's lawyer rose, the first arrow loosed in what would be a long battle. They laid out records, neat stacks of paper meant to bury me under numbers. According to them, my farm was mismanaged, taxes were nearly overdue, and maintenance had been neglected. Lies, each one. I knew every season, every payment, every nail hammered into those boards with my own hands. Then came Marla's voice. She spoke without hesitation, as if she had rehearsed it in the mirror. Her words cut sharper than Craig's lawyer ever could. "My father has become stubborn, forgetful, unwilling to see reason. This farm is too much for him now. It's time to transition it before something happens." The courtroom air seemed to vanish with each sentence. A few people in the gallery nodded, believing her. And in that moment, The sting wasn't just in the lies, it was in hearing my own daughter call me confused, as if the man who raised her had turned into a burden overnight. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, placing the leather folder on the stand as though it carried more than paper, it carried a life. The deed came first. I held it up, letting the judge see the seal, the signatures, the date that stretched back further than Craig and Marla's marriage. Then the receipts yellowed, fragile sheets showing lumber costs, contractor fees, all in my name. I spoke not as a man defending property, but as a widower who rebuilt his family's dream after burying the only woman he ever loved. The room grew quiet. Even the judge leaned slightly forward. I told them how every fence post had been set by me, every dollar scraped together, every long night spent patching walls while Marla slept safe inside. The silence wasn't mine to keep, it belonged to the truth that finally cut through their performance. But then came the final turn. A witness stepped forward, his voice rough but clear. A neighbor, one who had watched from a distance until now. He said he'd heard Craig weeks ago, bragging at the bar that the farm would soon be his once the old man was out of the picture. The judge's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing on Craig. Murmurs spread through the benches. Some of Marla's allies shifted uneasily, while others avoided looking at me altogether. Craig's face flushed, and for once, he didn't shout. He clenched his jaw and stared at the floor. Vindication didn't erase the betrayal, but it carved out space in my chest where pride began to return. The judge called for a recess. The gavel cracked like thunder, sending the room into a hum of whispers. I stood still, watching Marla avoid my gaze, Craig storming toward the hallway with his lawyer in tow. I remained in place, one hand still resting on the folder. They had come to bury me under lies, but all they'd done was uncover the truth I'd carried all along. The war wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Sitting at the plaintiff's table, I could hear every tick of the old clock above the judge's bench, each second stretching like an eternity. My palms rested on the polished wood, steady on the outside, though the storm within me thrashed harder with every passing moment. Marla sat across the aisle, her eyes fixed on her lap, refusing to meet mine. Craig, though, leaned back in his chair with that same smug grin he'd worn since the day he walked onto my farm like he owned it. The bailiff called for silence as the heavy door creaked open and the judge re-entered the courtroom. My chest tightened. For 74 years, I had worked, built, endured, and sacrificed. And now, in this single room, strangers would decide whether all of that meant anything or whether my own flesh and blood could erase me. The judge shuffled his papers, his gaze moving slowly across the courtroom. "This court has reviewed the documents and testimony provided," he began, his voice deep, deliberate. "There are several issues to address." Craig sat up straighter, that grin widening. My heart sank, then steadied itself. Whatever came next, I would face it. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Craig Hensley and Mrs. Marla Hensley presented financial records suggesting Mr. Luther Keene is incapable of managing his property. These documents. However, he paused. Lifting the stack of papers Craig's lawyer had waved so confidently just hours earlier, are riddled with inconsistencies. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. The judge continued, his tone sharper now. Dates that do not align, transactions recorded on days when banks were closed, and signatures he raised his brows that do not match. In contrast, Mr. Keene has produced the original deed, properly notarized and verified, along with receipts showing decades of consistent payments for taxes and repairs. The smirk faded from Craig's face. Marla's shoulders trembled. The judge's voice carried the weight of finality. The claims of incompetence are dismissed. This man has maintained his farm faithfully and honorably. Age does not erase his rights. I felt my lungs expand for the first time all morning. A hand from the benches behind me, an old neighbor squeezed my shoulder. My dignity, so battered these past weeks, began to rise again, but the judge wasn't finished. He adjusted his seat, his eyes narrowing as if cutting deeper into the pile of lies before him. Furthermore, during testimony, it was revealed that an attempt was made to bribe a court clerk to expedite this petition. Evidence has been provided, and the clerk himself has testified. Gasps shot through the room. All eyes turned to Craig. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and stern. Order Marla's face crumpled. Tears spilled as she buried her head in her hands, her voice breaking. Craig, tell me this isn't true. But Craig's mask shattered. He stood abruptly, pointing a finger at her, then at the judge, then at everyone in the room. You're all against me, every last one of you. His voice cracked with fury. Even you. Marla, you knew this was the plan. The gallery erupted, voices overlapping in a storm of outrage and disbelief. Family members turned on one another, some siding with me, others shrinking into silence. The weight of shame pressed visibly onto Marla until she could no longer lift her head. I remained seated, silent, steady. Their chaos could not touch me anymore. When order was restored, the judge's words were final. This court rules in favor of Mr. Luther Keene. Ownership of the farm remains solely with him. The gavel fell like thunder. My knees nearly gave out as I stood, but pride held me tall. I glanced at Craig, his face twisted with rage, and at Marla, whose tears spoke of regret far too late. Walking out of that courthouse, I carried no joy, only a bittersweet relief. I had won my farm, but I had lost something deeper. The family I once dreamed would carry its legacy with honor. The land remained mine, but the bond between father and daughter lay in ruins. The sun outside was blinding as I stepped into the afternoon air. Strangers I barely knew nodded in respect. Neighbors whispered apologies for doubting me. My dignity, though battered, was intact. And then a voice cut through the noise. A stranger, leaning against the stone wall near the courthouse steps, caught my arm gently. His voice was low, meant only for me. You don't know the whole truth yet. They weren't the only ones plotting. My breath hitched. His eyes held something I couldn't place, warning. Maybe pity. I froze there on the courthouse steps. Victory in my pocket, but a new shadow already falling across it. The golden light of the sunset washed across the fields when I came back to the farmhouse. Weeks had passed since the trial, but every step onto the soil felt heavier than before. The boards creaked under my boots, the same ones I'd nailed decades ago with calloused hands. The farm was mine. Yes, but the victory came with an emptiness that clung to me like dust in the rafters. Sacrifice built this place, and sacrifice seemed to be the only way I'd ever keep it. Gratitude rose with the breeze, but so did the sorrow of knowing I stood alone now more than ever. Evening shadows lengthened as I sat on the porch, listening to cicadas hum their old summer songs. That was when the stranger appeared, the same man who had whispered at the courthouse. He walked the path slow, like someone carrying a secret that burned too hot to hold. His voice was low but steady. Craig had never fought alone. He had tied himself to an outside investor, promising slices of my land for money I never saw. My breath caught in my throat. To think I could have lost everything, not just to family, but to vultures who never set foot on this soil. Suspicion hardened inside me. Betrayal had roots deeper than I realized, as if summoned by the truth. Craig stumbled onto the porch that same night. His face looked gaunt, desperate, like a man whose schemes had eaten him alive. Marla trailed behind, her shoulders hunched, eyes wet with shame. Craig didn't even pretend anymore. He admitted he never cared for this farm, only the money he thought it could bring. His words were bitter, hollow, as if confessing freed him from the weight. Marla's voice cracked as she begged forgiveness, claiming Craig had cornered her into siding against me. My heart clenched, torn between rage and a tired sort of release. I stood, the porch boards groaning with the decision that had already taken shape inside me. "This farm is not just soil," I said, my voice steady. "It's legacy, and legacy can't be stolen." Craig was finished. I disowned him then and there. His ties to me cut as surely as if I'd closed a gate and thrown away the key. To Marla, I left a sliver of hope reconciliation, but only if she proved she understood what respect truly meant. I would not hand forgiveness cheaply. Blood may bind, but without honor, it isn't family, it's just names on paper, later, by the fireplace. I sat in silence. The flames licked at the logs, their warmth unable to chase away the chill of betrayal. I reflected not on what I'd lost, but what I'd fought to protect. Greed had tried to strip me bare, but standing firm restored something deeper than land. It restored dignity. I spoke then, not to the walls or the fire, but to whoever cared to listen beyond them. Family bonds mean nothing without respect. Love may be a gift, but respect must always be earned. The cost of forgetting that truth was written into every scar this house carried, and into mine as well. I leaned back, the crackle of the fire soft in my ears. My eyes traced the beams I once lifted by hand, now blackened slightly with time. The farm was saved, but its quiet told me something more. Victory never comes free. Some prices last a lifetime. The final closing line: I saved my farm. But more importantly, I saved myself. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: love is a gift, but respect must be earned.